38A, and we are learning about the laws of the waving of the lulav. It's called Shiorei Mitzvah. And the benefits of waving the lulav, there's certain benefits, certain blessings you get. It prevents ruchos rois, tlolim roim, bad winds, bad dew. It's also emphasizing that that we're doing it, the mitzvah for Hashem. And the way the Maharsha learned yesterday, we saw a Maharsha that said the emphasis is on the Torah, that the whole world is dependent on the Torah. The Torah gives existence to the whole world. It's interesting. The Maharsha said this about the waving that was done on the karbanos. So he really was explaining the sacrifices, the shtei alechem, the breads, because the breads were made with the 10 isroinos, the 10 it's a certain measure. It's called an isaron, 10 of these isaroins of flour. And the 10 symbolizes the Aseret HaDibros, so it symbolizes the 10 Commandments, the Torah. And so the Torah, the fact that you waved it, the 4 directions, and the up and down, is emphasizing that the Torah is what's giving life to all those directions. The shtei alechem, the 2 breads, that's what's giving life, so to speak, to all these, the Torah. So it's giving life to the whole world. And it's the Torah that's protecting us from all the different evil winds and evil dew. Truth is, it would be interesting to see if the Maharsha extends it to the lulav part. That's a very nice interpretation for the shtei halechem. But the question is, what would he say when it says v'chein belulav? Does he extend this insight into v'chein belulav? Interesting that he says this whole thing about this about the Torah. He says it over here. In Belulav, he says, look at what I explained in Menachos. The 2 species of the lulav, 2 of them make fruits and 2 don't make fruits. So look at what I said over there. And interesting. It seems that what he says over here has to do with the fact that when we talk about the wavings, the main thing is the lulav and the esrog part. And because it says the lulav is in the right hand, the esrog is in the left hand, it doesn't really mention the other species. He says that's the main waving, that's what's the ones that make fruit, those 2 are the main wavings, that it prevents evil winds and bad dew, because that's really seemingly connected to this idea of the growth of the crops. So it's all about, these are the ones that bring fruit. They're the ones who are important to make the wavings with. And then he goes Kabbalistically about the the lulav is preventing these ruchais and tlolim royim, which refers to the koyach hatuma, the impurities, sitra desmola, the source of severity. So it's mevatel. It nullifies the koyach hara, the evil. But anyway, so that's the Kabbalistic connection there with that it prevents these koyach hatuma misitra desmola, that the lulav somehow prevents it. So in other words, the way you simply learn the Gemara is that it's by doing this mitzvah, we're doing even an extra mitzvah where we're doing things that aren't part of the Iker mitzvah. It's called the Shiyari mitzvah. Nevertheless, it's ma'akiv the piranhas. It prevents punishment. Kabbalistically, according the deeper meaning is that by shaking the lulav, you're actually preventing these ruchais utlolim royim, these bad winds and bad dew, which refers to the severities and the koyach hatuma, the impurities, and you're actually preventing them. It's referring to the spiritual realms. Okay. Anyway, we're up to the new Mishnah. So we're really up to, there is one thing that I did want to mention, and that is that this whole discussion of the Gemara, which we talked about the waving, previous Mishnah talked about where you do the waving, and we spoke a little about doing it in 4 directions or 6 directions, but Tosfos brings down that there is a Yerushalmi that talks about waving it 3 times, and the commentaries deal with the Yerushalmi asks a question. He says, do you count the to and the fro? Do you count the going forward and the coming back each as a separate entity, or is each one considered once? And of course, all the commentaries try to figure out what exactly is the Jerusalem Talmud asking, and what specific laws is being dealt with over there. But the thing is, so the Yerushalmi says you need to wave it in three times for each thing. I'll call davar v'davar. For each thing, it needs to be waved 3 times. So one way of learning each thing could be each time where you wave it, and where it mentions by hoidu, by ana Hashem Mashiach, by the other hoidu. So that could be what it means each time. It could also mean each time that you wave it to and fro, you have to shake it 3 times. Anyway, so there's a big discussion here. Is the lulav waving, is there an extra shake? Does the leaves have to shake when you do the lulav shake? Or is it the waving is moving it in the different directions? Is that the wave? Or is the wave an additional shake? So this is all being discussed in the commentaries here, and it's basing itself on this Yerushalmi. And how many times do you have to wave it in each direction? So the Yerushalmi that says that you're supposed to wave it 3 times might mean you're supposed to do a 3-time shake, or it might mean 3 times in each direction. So 3 times to the right, which would be if you're facing east. If you're facing east, so 3 times to the right would be south, then north, then, and you're doing it 3 times, or does it mean just once, but shake it 3 times? So this is a topic of discussion. All the Rishonim talk about this, and seemingly the custom is that commonly is done is we actually wave it 3 times to each direction. I think that's the commonly accepted custom. But even when you do that, do you do a little shake each time you wave it in that direction, and maybe you also give a little shake in each time you do a shake. But anyway, Yerushalmi has this shaila if you're supposed to do a wave, if we count in the 3 times, do you count the going and the coming, or is that all considered one, or is that each one considered a separate? And so that's the discussion there on the bottom. Tosfos he deals with this. The Ritva, the Ran, they're all trying to figure out how to fulfill the mitzvah of the waving, and does it need to be 3 times? Just let me mute everyone and then unmute you. Just 1 second, Moshe. I see there's a lot of sound here. I'm just going to mute everyone. Okay. Now, let me just answer Mordechai first. Mordechai was raising his hand. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, isn't the Chabad custom, well, we do 3 separate ones, but we also, each time, we start from our heart.
Right. Each time we start from our heart. Right. So you're saying, is that like the first way, like we're waving it at each time because it's by the heart, and then waving it there and waving it back? So it seems like maybe we're doing all 3. We're waving it 3 times and we're shaking it 3 times, 6 times almost, like each. Yeah, I was thinking about that. That was something that was going through my mind. But what's interesting is that we are careful. We like to have very closed lulavs. Now, the whole concept of the shaking seems to be that the leaves are supposed to rustle a little. But if it's so tight, I was thinking, it doesn't seem like it's exactly like the commentary seem to understand it here. In other words, the way they're understanding the shaking, at least according to some, is that the leaves are supposed to rustle. And now, depending on how tight it is, you wonder if we're really fulfilling it fully properly. There are that's not the only custom. Some have customs probably to have more loose lulavs, but in Lubavitch it seems to be the accepted custom to have a very tight lulav. So trying to think maybe if even if it's tight, it still rustles a drop. I guess I don't know. I guess that's because the commentary seemed to understand that it has to rustle a little. I guess that's the we rely on the fact that if it's Russell's a drop, that's probably considered good enough. Yes, Moshe.
No, I just wanted to know. Mordecai pretty much answered. It's a minhag. It's a minhag. The Ashkenazim do it 3 times, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, everyone does it 3 times. And it's based on this Yerushalmi. Again, the Gemara didn't say 3 times. The Mishnah of the Gemara, we saw the Mishnah of the Gemara. It basically just said to wave it in all 6 directions. But it didn't seem to mention the 3 times part. This is based on the Tosfos here that brings Yerushalmi. So it seems like that became the accepted tradition. I mean, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, obviously. It's brought in, the Ramah brings it, and I believe the Mechaber also we'll have to take a look. Maybe it's Shulchan Aruch and bring it. Okay, so that was the on the previous Gemara, and now we're up to the new Mishnah. Okay, let me mute everyone again because I hear some background noise. Okay, so the new Mishnah. Well, no, I shouldn't say new Mishnah. We started the Gemara. We started the this Mishnah. The Mishnah had said Misha Baba Derech, and we've been dealing with the person who has to interrupt his meal in order to shake lulav. The Gemara had asked that how does this fit with the law about Shabbos? With the law that's learned in Tractate Shabbos about mincha, about davening mincha, that over there it mentions that you don't have to interrupt. And And the understanding there is that I something that bothered me when I was learning this was it seems that they're very different cases. There, you started before the time of mincha. You started in the morning. So maybe you could say, this is what was bothering me. Maybe you could say that there's a very big difference. Our case, lulav, you came home, you were traveling, you arrived home. It's already the time that person's supposed to shake lulav, and you were hungry, so you start eating. Then you realized, oh, I didn't shake lulav. Now the other case is you decided to you woke up you you woke up extra early on a Friday on a any day of the week. You woke up early. You did your chakras. You were doing your exercise. You finally decided to eat a late breakfast, and your late breakfast leads into mincha time. Okay, so I started eating in the morning. It happened to lead into my mincha time. No problem. Here we tell you, you don't have to interrupt your meal. You know why you don't have to interrupt your meal? Because you started when it was permissible. Lulav, the case of lulav, you started when you weren't supposed to. You came home, it was in the middle of the day. You should have shaken lulav first. The mincha case, you started eating a late breakfast. That led into mincha. Okay, but you started eating on an okay time. Maybe that's the difference here. But the thing is, no, because over there in the tractate Shabbos, where it talks about this law about eating by mincha time, it applies there. The law is applicable there, even if you started when you weren't allowed to. So it really does match the case of the lulav. And there it mentions, even if you started after the time of mincha came, you started eating a meal after the time where you should have davened mincha, and there it says you don't have to interrupt. That's why it's a good question. Otherwise, you could really answer in a simple way. So over there it clarifies, at least the understanding over there is that it's that it applies even in such a case. The commentaries deal with it over there. Okay, so the Gemara here is bothered by this problem. Basically, both cases, if you started eating after you should have done a mitzvah, you started eating instead of doing a mitzvah that you should have been doing. And one place we tell you got to interrupt, another place we tell you don't. By lulav we say interrupt. By mincha we say you don't have to interrupt. So what's the first answer? The first answer that the Gemara gives, it depends on how much time you have left in the day. The second answer the Gemara gives, it says, like by kushya, what's even the question? There's a difference between daraisa and darabanan. What's the difference daraisa and darabanan? The difference of daraisa and darabanan is lulav, the first day at least, is biblical, and by the case of mincha, it's considered darabanan. We've been touching on this before about davening being daraisa or darabanan, and but mincha for sure should be darabanan, because if you davened an earlier davening, so then mincha will according to all opinions will be a darabanan, and so there's a difference between daraisa and darabanan. What would the difference be? That by a case of daraisa, biblical obligation like lulav, the first day of Sukkot, or outside of Israel, possibly even the second day, the law of lulav carries with it a more strict rules because it's a biblical law. It's not just to commemorate something. This is the actual law. The other days of Sukkot, it's rabbinic. So on the first day, it's biblical. So fine. On a biblical law, we're going to tell you got to interrupt. The case of mincha is a rabbinic law, and for that we permit you would be permitted to continue eating until you finish, and then you could daven mincha. So that was the Rava's claim that there's a big difference. You can't really compare the two. One is Daraisa, one's Rabbanan. You know, it's not exactly a comparison. The Gemara then says, Ella Amar Rava. Let's read this. Let's learn this inside. This is the new piece, actually. Ella Amar Rava. So we are maybe 15 lines from the top of the page. 38a. 38a. Ella Amar Rava. Ella Amar Rava. Rather, Rava says, you know what the question that Rav Safra answered was? Not the way we said it earlier, that there's a contradiction, lulav to mincha. No. It's a different question. And Rav Safra answered it, his answer to a different question. Because that question is not really a question. You're not even gonna ask such a question. Daraisa, big difference. Daraisa, Darabanan, that's not really a contradiction. It must be ikasha, hakasha. If there was a question that Rav Safra came to answer, it must be a different question. What's the question? When he enters his house, he takes the lulav, even though he's by his table, or while he's at his table, he has to interrupt and take his lulav. While he's eating his meal, I should say. While he's eating his meal, he takes the lulav then. And Alma, we see the mafsik that he has to interrupt. He has to interrupt his meal. That's what the word said. He interrupts his meal and does lulav. You see that he interrupts. Alma the mafsik. V'hadar Tani, in the same Mishnah, right afterwards, it returns and teaches, Loy not al shachris yito ben arbayim. If you didn't take it in the morning, you could take it in the afternoon. Alma, we see from there that it's not a big deal. You didn't take it. Loy mafsik, you don't have to interrupt. You could always take it in the afternoon, in the later afternoon. So that was the question on that. Rav Safra like kasha on that. So which one is it? Do you have to interrupt it? Could you push it off? So on that, Rav Safra says like kasha habadika shoyis bayoim. It's not a kasha, not a contradiction. Here we're talking about you have time in the day after you finish your meal, and if you have time, then you don't have to interrupt. Take it in the afternoon. That's the second part of the Mishnah. But here in the first part of the Mishnah, there is not time in the day. There's not time in the day, and therefore it's already getting night, and therefore you would need to interrupt your meal. That was Rav Safra's way of answering. So the Gemara initially thought the question was that it's a contradiction, lulav to sukkah. And on that, the Gemara says an answer that Rav Safra said, and then Rava says it's not even a question. Must be that the question was a little different. And on that is what Rav Safra answered. And what was the question? It was a question of lulav to lulav, not lulav to mincha, but lulav on lulav. That one place it says, if you don't do it in the morning, you do it in the afternoon. It sounds like there's no big deal. You finish your meal and do it later. And the other place it says, al shulchanai. While you're eating, you gotta take the lulav. So what it sounds like you have to interrupt. That Rav Safra says no, it's not a kasha. You have more time in the day is fine, but if it's getting late, then you should really stop what you're doing. Now, Amar Rav Zedra, but Rav Zedra says, really, that's the kasha? That's not a kasha. My kushya. What's such a question? Dilma mitzvah liafsuke. Maybe really you're obligated to always interrupt. Even if you have a lot of time left, you should interrupt. The Eloi Pasuk, all the Mishnah said was, if you didn't take it in the morning, take it in the afternoon. Not that you could push it off. You didn't do it. You were supposed to do it right away. because Eloi Pasik, Yitol Beino Arbayim. If you didn't do it and you didn't do what you were supposed to, even to interrupt your meal you didn't do, even though you should have, then, according to halacha, still yotze, because kol hayom is kosher lulav, the whole day is kosher for lulav, and therefore it's okay. But are you really allowed to eat and continue eating? No, really, you should interrupt. And so Reb Zera doesn't see this as a contradiction at all, because he understands the end part of the Mishnah. Not that if you didn't do it in the morning, you can push it off till the afternoon. No, if you didn't do it when you were supposed to, and now it's late, you could do it now. You could still do it. Oh, the whole day is kosher, the lulav. So you should have interrupted everything whatever you were in the middle of. So according to Rav Zera, he doesn't like this contradiction. He says this is not a good contradiction. Elon Rav Zera lo ilam kedarmina meikara. So Rav Zera says, no, you know what? The contradiction was that, like we said earlier, it's a contradiction. Mincha to lulav. Lulav says you have to interrupt. Mincha, you don't have to interrupt. What do you mean? One was daraisa, one darabana. He says, nah, that's not a kasher. The kasher loch hadaraisa, hadarabana. Just that you said one is daraisa, one's darabana. Here we're talking about Yom Tov Sheni. We're talking about the second day of Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael, or further days of Yom Tov outside of Israel. Those days to shake lulav is also drabanan. So mincha is rabbinic, and lulav is rabbinic. Again, the first day is biblical. It may be outside of Israel is biblical, but after that, it's always rabbinic. So the Gemara says the Yom Tov Sheni drabanan. That's compared. That's the contradiction. That both are drabanans, and one we tell you got to interrupt. The other one we say you don't have to interrupt. Now, how do we know that we're talking about the second day Yom Tov? Maybe we're talking about the first day Yom Tov. So who says? So the Gemara says, Dekanami, it's also meduyak, it's also implied this way from the wording. Midatani, because it says, Misha babaderech, ve'in biyadei lulav. If a person comes on the way and doesn't have a lulav, so why is he babaderech? Why is he traveling? The isal kadaitach b'yom tov rishon. Do you think if you were to think, if it would go up in your mind that it's talking about the first day of Yom Tov, misharin? Is it permissible to be babaderech, to come to be traveling? You don't go outside of the tchum. You can't go outside of a tchum is even less than a mile. You can't walk in an open area. In other words, if there's no houses around outside of a city, you're limited to how far you can walk. It's according the laws of Shabbos. And so the rule is you can't. So if it's baba derech, which we're talking about, and it says you have to interrupt, it must be talking about not the first day Yom Tov. First day Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be baba derech. You can't really be traveling. Must be a different day of Yom Tov, and then it's not considered biblical. It's considered the shaking of the lulav is only a rabbinic law to commemorate what they did in the Beis Hamikdash. That in the Beis Hamikdash they would shake the lulav every single day, and so now outside of Israel, in the entire world, really, everywhere, even in Israel and outside Israel, every day of Sukkot we shake the lulav, but it's rabbinic, and that rabbinic law. Why one place does it say that you're obligated to interrupt, and the other place by mincha it says you're not obligated to interrupt? The answer is, as Reb Safra said, that the difference would be if there's time or there isn't time. If you have more time in the day, then you could, if there's more time in the day, then you would be able to finish your meal and then daven mincha or shake lulav. There's no time in the day. You got to quickly shake lulav and daven mincha. So that is the understanding of Reb Zera. Now there is a little question over here. What's the question? The question is that there's a Mishnah, there's a Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara over there says that person got up early to go on the way, and it uses a similar term, lotzeis laderech. The person goes on his way, so he wants to, and we quoted this a little earlier, a few days ago. We quoted this, that person gets up early before sunrise. He wants to blow shofar. So what does it say? That for you're yaitze. You could fulfill the mitzvah, blow shofar. You could shake the lulav, right? We mentioned this earlier on, that there is such a statement that you would be allowed to go from dawn. From dawn, you could fulfill some of these mitzvahs. Now, think about it. It says over there you're going on the way, and so therefore you could fulfill some mitzvahs even though it's not sunrise yet. You can still fulfill these mitzvahs. You got to go somewhere. Fine. What mitzvahs does it mention there? Blowing shofar. How do you blow shofar if you're going? What day do you blow shofar on? Rosh Hashanah. Lulav, there are days that you're allowed to travel, right? Because you shake lulav on Chol Hamoed. But shofar, what day do you blow shofar? It's only Rosh Hashanah. There's a minute to blow during Elul and Shul, but there's no obligation. There's not a chiyuv. The obligation blow shofar is on Yom Tov, and still it says over there Baba Derech. So it uses the same term. So who says our diuk is such a good diuk? You have a proof that it's not really a good diuk. It's not a good proof from the grammar, from the wording, from the choice of words, that it's talking about the second day Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed. You think that's what it's talking about, Chol Hamoed, because it uses the word Baba Derech. Over there in Gemara Brachos, it uses this Baba Derech, Lotzeis Laderech, and it talks about blowing shofar. And there, it's obviously Yom Tov. It's Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, and it talks about blowing shofar. How could you can't go out of the Tchum on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Tov, and Shabbos both have the laws of Tchum. So what's the diuk over here? So the commentaries explain that the fact that the statement in Brachos, it uses that term Hishkim Lotzeis Laderech, is not really for the shofar case. It's really for the lulav and Megillah. That was talking about other cases. It wasn't really talking about in other words, that word that it uses, hishkim, that you got up early and you wanted to do these mitzvahs, that's really referring to the other cases, but not to the case of the shofar. Because for shofar, you can't do. It's trying to give you an example. You got up early, you needed to go somewhere, giving you an example, you needed to travel. But that example only applies to the other two cases. That example wouldn't be a perfect example. Here, we're talking about lulav, and it says Baba Derech. Here, we have one situation here. It's talking about lulav, and it's saying Baba Derech. That is a proof. Okay. So that would be the answer. That's one of the answers that they give.
How do you explain that?
How do you explain what? How is it a proof?
No, how are you explaining that the person's going on a trip and he's going out and it's Yontif?
Yeah, so it's almost like saying it's basically saying an example like imagine you had to travel to Tallahassee, and you only have your lulav. You need to go. Your flight is early in the morning, and your lulav, your megillah, your shofar. How you gonna do this? So the law is you're allowed to start at dawn. So you could shake the lulav at dawn and then quickly go to the airport. You should be fine. Now I mentioned 3 cases. Megillah, you're going to Tallahassee. You shake lulav at dawn. Dawn, you're going to be able to do it at dawn. So you do the Megillah, you do lulav, do shofar. Now, so I gave you an example. You're going to Tallahassee, and I gave you this lulav, Megillah, and shofar. Now, you're going to have to use your head and understand that my example that I happened to dig up and dream of, that example only applies to the Megillah case and the lulav case. The shofar was not a perfect example for it. I just mentioned the case that you're going to Tallahassee, but really the same law applies to shofar. If let's say you had to walk somewhere, you had to, you had some urgent thing that you had to help someone who's giving birth, or you had some urgent matter, but you're not going to the airport to Tallahassee on Rosh Hashanah. But the example I gave applied to the other 2 cases. So that's basically what the way they're explaining that it says it over there. It mentions that you were traveling, and uses the case of lulav, Megillah, and shofar. Really, the case of the example of traveling was applicable to the other 2. That's all. Is that understandable, David?
I just don't understand why the idea of shofar was brought up at all.
Well, because the halacha applies there. The halacha applies there that you are yotze, you fulfill the obligation, even if you did it earlier than sunrise. From dawn, you could fulfill the mitzvah of shofar. Might not be ideal, but you could fulfill the mitzvah.
So this is talking about the day before Rosh Hashanah.
No, the day of Rosh Hashanah, the day before Rosh Hashanah, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. You're not allowed to hear. You're not supposed to blow shofar on the day before Rosh Hashanah, right? Could they, in order to confuse the Satan? But on Rosh Hashanah itself, it's talking about that if you blew shofar from dawn, if you needed to, you could fulfill the obligation. Let's say someone's going into surgery or something. They need to, they want to hear shofar, and the surgery is starting at sunrise. So you can tell, go blow shofar before. That's basically what the halacha is. So the exact example that the case gives in the Gemara Brachas about really applies to the other 2 cases.
Rabbi?
Okay.
Yes, Moshe.
I heard that blowing the shofar when somebody is possessed with something, like they have a shadim or something within, that the shofar is blown in order to get rid of the shadim, and it goes out one of the ears or something, or one of the eyes. And this is done by certain rebbeim, in order to, if somebody's possessed, this was given by a rabbi that I know in a shiur, actually at the Beit Knesset that I go to, but this was some time ago in one of his classes. But how does that play into this? I'm just curious.
About a dibuk?
I mean, the shofar is used aside from Rosh Hashanah. That's what I'm saying. If it's used, you say it's only used for Rosh Hashanah,
Yeah. So you're saying they sometimes use shofars for other purposes?
To chase shadim out of person who is possessed. They blow the shofar. They blow the shofar.
Right. Yeah, it's not really connected to this. We're talking about fulfilling a mitzvah here. You know what I mean? It's really not applicable. We're talking about fulfilling the mitzvah and using, waking up early and doing the mitzvah, doing an obligation. Can you fulfill it at a certain time? So on. It has nothing to do with the shofar. Okay. So I should just mention that Taisus over here asked this question. Taisus gives two answers. Just in case, David, in case you didn't like the answer that I gave. So Taisus does say 2 other things. He says, if you look at the actual wording, the Gemara Brachas talks about hishkim latzes. You got up early to go somewhere. And our Mishnah says that ba baderech, that he's going. So there it says hishkim latzes. You're getting up to go out on the way. And it sounds like maybe you're going to some rav, some, that and you want to shake lulav before you go to the chacham. Now, but here it says Misha Babadera, a person who's coming on the way. It sounds like when he reaches his house, it sounds like he's coming from a far place to his house. In other words, the term Babaderech sounds different than Hishkim Lotzes Laderech. Hishkim Lotzes Laderech sounds like you're going away, but you're not going too far. You're not going out of the Tchum. You're going to another area, another neighborhood that's nearby. Just the term. So that again, that's terminology. And then Taisa says one other point. He says that that the term of these terms, Baba Derech and Lotzes Laderech, they always could mean you're going somewhere within the Tchum, within the laws of Shabbos. He says where we know what the case is, then obviously you were not going to say it means the second day Yom Tov because it used the word Baderech or Lotzis Laderech. If we know it's talking about Rosh Hashanah, it's Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, it means within the Tchum. But in our case, it's definitely possible to mean, it definitely is acceptable to mean even from far. So in other words, if we know that it's talking about on Yom Tov, fine. But here, it's definitely possible to mean that it's going far. If it's going far and it's on Sukkot, he's shaking the lulav, it must mean it's talking about Chol HaMoed. In that case, it has to mean one thing. Here, it could mean the other thing. It could mean that it's the second day Yom Tov, and that's why he's going. And that's why the Gemara understands it to be hinting that way. Again, it's meduyak. It's not like a shema minah. This has to be this way. It's meduyak. It's hinted to. Okay. Now, Jeffrey, you wanted to say something, I think. No. Okay. So, so what comes out from this? What comes out is that the first day, it's very interesting that the term the Gemara uses is b'yom tov sheni. I mean, of course, we've seen this term before, but what's this concept of Yom Tov Sheni? In Israel, there is no such thing, Yom Tov Sheni. Yom Tov Sheni is in Golus, in exile. You have the second day of Yom Tov is called Yom Tov Sheni. It's called the second day Yom Tov because there used to be a question, what day is really Yom Tov? We don't know what day the rabbis established. The calendar wasn't set, and therefore it could be that there was only 29 days in the previous month and not 30 days in the previous month. And if that was so, then, this would be the day of Yom Tov begins. And if it's 30 days in the previous month, maybe Yom Tov begins the next day. And therefore, they often had a question, we don't know what day Yom Tov really begins. And so outside of Israel, they used to celebrate these 2 days of Yom Tov because of this question. Now, this idea of Yom Tov Sheni is very understandable, that they had to be machmir, they had to keep next day Yom Tov. The question would be, when it comes to lulav, in the case of lulav, is the first day is biblical. In the other days of Sukkot is rabbinic, because it's all based on a takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that we shouldn't forget. We shouldn't forget the Beis Hamikdash, and then Beis Hamikdash used to shake the lulav every single day of Sukkot. So because of that, the shaking of the lulav every of the days of Sukkot, all the other days of Sukkot is rabbinic. However, question really is, what about the second day? The second day is always called the Sveika D'Yoma. It's questionable if this is like the first day. Is this really the first day of Sukkot? So this day might be biblical. So because it's a question if it's biblical or rabbinic, so we generally tended to be machmir and strict and considerate, like it's biblical. Now, if that's so, and we don't do work, now in Israel, they do work on the second day of Sukkot, because it's Kol HaMoed. They're allowed to travel. You can't do certain work. Certain work is prohibited, but a lot of work is permitted. A lot of things. You're allowed to drive. You're allowed to turn on lights. You're allowed to, it's the Chol Hamoed. It's the intermediate days of the holiday. Now, but the question that and I've mentioned before that outside of Israel, there seems to be some dilemma about how far do we take these laws of holiday, the laws of being a Yom Tov, how far do we take them on the second day of Sukkot? For example, with regard to lulav, we spoke, at length about the certain things are prohibited on the first day of Sukkot for a lulav or esrog to have certain blemishes, but after the first day it's permitted to use things with certain blemishes, like the case of taking a bite out of his esrog. The first day he didn't do that, but after the first day it was fine. He was allowed to have a chasser, missing a little piece, his esrog. It's okay. What about the second day of Yom Tov? What about on the second day of Yom Tov has all the stringencies as the first day outside of Israel. In Israel, the second day Yom Tov, of course, is fine. He's taking his bite. It's okay. But what about on the outside of Israel? What is the law? Do we say, well, we're not sure. This might be the first day of Yom Tov, and we follow that tradition fully. It's exactly like it might have been the first day, and therefore we keep it the same way, and all the things that are prohibited on the first day are prohibited on the second day in exile and Golus, diaspora? Or do we say no? It's rabbinic. We're just following the tradition and of keeping it as a Yom Tov, but in truth, it's not really Yom Tov, and therefore we could be lenient. It's not the first day. We know when the first day is, and we're just following the minhag avosenu v'yodenu. This is our tradition to continue, even though now we have a calendar, but we continue the tradition that it's Yom Tov. But what we know about, we're not going to say the esrog is not valid. We know it's a valid esrog, and we know that today is not the first day Yom Tov. Now, so there's a whole debate, but the question is, what about the wording? The wording of our Gemara is Yom Tov Sheni. Is it Yom Tov or is it the second day? Why is it calling it Yom Tov Sheni? So, of course, the commentaries are all like struggling with this Yom Tov Sheni. Yom Tov Sheni is not the exact wording that it should use. Again, the wording that the Gemara says, Hacha b'Yom Tov Sheni d'Rabbanan askinon. Here it's Yom Tov Sheni. It's d'Rabbanan. Yeah, Yom Tov Sheni. If it's talking about outside of Israel, it's not exactly d'Rabbanan. It's a suffix d'Oraisa. It's a potential d'Oraisa. If it's talking about in Israel, why are you calling it Yom Tov Sheni? So the commentaries understand that really Chol Hamoed is still called Yom Tov. That there is a concept that Chol Hamoed is still called Yom Tov, and it's true. It's permitted to do certain work, but really it's usher in work. It's only that certain work is not prohibited. Most work is prohibited on Chol Hamoed. So it's not that it's like, oh, some work is prohibited, but really it's permitted to do work. But only some things. No, it's the opposite. Really, this is Yom Tov. Even Chol Hamoed is called Yom Tov. And certain things, the rabbis, the certain things are permitted. So it's really still called Yom Tov. Now, it is interesting in the Lubavitch Nusach, Yom Mikra Kodesh Hazeh, there is a wording in the Musaf where we switch from, instead of saying Yom Tov, we actually say Yom to pull it up. But this is there's an interesting, it would be interesting to look into this, but I don't have a siddur in front of me. But the Nusach, let me see if it's in my app. I don't know if it's here, if they have a Musaf for Chol Hamoed. Let's see if it's here.
Rabbi, while you're looking that up, can I read you this note?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my app doesn't.
This is from the Ritva.
Yeah.
It says Yom Tov Sheni. In this context, the term Yom Tov Sheni is referring to all the intermediate days it's referring to Chol Hamoed.
Right.
From here, it's clear that the sages occasionally refer to the intermediate days as festival days, based on the language of the Torah. The fact that this is not manifest in the prayers on the intermediate days is due to the fact that labor is not prohibited on those days. If they were referred to as festivals, it could lead to a situation where people would take the actual festival days lightly.
Okay. So that touches on it. So it's not referred to it in the davening specifically because if we did refer to it, it would be would minimize the importance of the actual Yom Tov. But really, it is called Yom Tov. Is that what you're saying? Really, it is called Yom Tov?
Yeah, I think
so. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah.
I have to pull up the Ritva.
So.
Okay, yeah, very nice. So in any event, it seems like it's still called Yom Tov Chol Hamoed because it's talking about the other days of Sukkot. All the other days, they're all rabbinic, and it can't be talking about. There's one thing I should have said. If it was talking about the second day Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz, when it says Yom Tov Sheni, we're also not allowed to drive. We're not allowed to be Baba Derech. The same problem you have with the first day, you'll have the saying this. The whole point the Gemara is trying to bring is you could be Baba Derech. It has to be talking about not the second day outside of Israel. It has to be talking about the Chol Hamoed days because the whole point of the Gemara of the Dekonami is to show that he's Baba Derech. He's traveling. It must not be a Yom Tov day. So instead, it's calling it Yom Tov Sheni. It's interesting that it uses that term, Yom Tov Sheni.
Because, the term Chol Hamoed, it's Chol, but it's Hamoed. Moed
Right.
is Yom Tov.
Yeah. Well, Moed, Yom Tov, the question is, are those words interchangeable or not? Does Moed just mean a semi Yom Tov? Maybe Yom Tov means more of a full Yom Tov. That's really what we're dealing with here. Or possibly it's called Yom Tov Sheni because outside of Israel it's called Yom Tov Sheni. So therefore in Israel they also call it Yom Tov Sheni, but it's really Chol Hamoed. So it could be that's the meaning of Yom Tov Sheni, that it's called Yom Tov Sheni because of outside of Israel, but we're really talking about in Israel on the second day, and we just call it Yom Tov Sheni because of the term that's used outside of Israel. So that could be another reason why it uses that term Yom Tov Sheni, because it's talking about the day that outside of Israel is called Yom Tov Sheni, and we're in the Gemara is referring to it as that day that's called Yom Tov Sheni. In Israel, you're allowed to drive, and therefore it would be considered a day that it's drabanan to shake lulav, and it would be a contradiction from mincha, and therefore the conclusion of the Gemara was that it depends if there's shahus bayom, if you have time to shake later or not. If you don't have time to shake later, you have to interrupt your meal. Okay, that's really
it's like those days should have been actually Yom Tov, but because Hashem had Rachmanis on the Jews, he couldn't make the whole 7 days, the whole 8 days Yom Tov.
Is that what it says? That it is because of
that's
Rachmanis?
That's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying.
It's a thought. Your thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
That all the days of all the days of Sukkot or all the days of Pesach, all those days should have been Yom Tov. But because of the mercy that Hashem had on the Yidden, that's why those intermediate days are just not full Yom Tov. They're Chol, but they're Chol HaMoed. HaMoed is Yom Tov.
Right. Okay, that's an interesting thought. I guess it needs to be, you need to find some sources to say that Hashem had mercy on the Yidden, but maybe it says it somewhere. Maybe there's a medrash like that. I don't know. Okay, sounds good. Sounds like a nice thought. You could probably search it on the internet. Maybe you'll find something about it.
I never thought it was a Shaila. I thought it was.
That's the way. Oh, that's the way you always understood it. That Hashem had mercy on the Yidden. It could be. It could be. I don't know if it's. That's the shot.
Maybe I heard it someplace.
Maybe heard it. It definitely, sounds like it could be true. Okay, so we are now up to the next Mishnah. Okay, Mishnah on page 38a, and we are how many lines from the bottom? Maybe about 9 lines from the bottom of the page. 9 lines up from the bottom of the page. 38a starts. We're starting the new Mishnah. Now, there's two Mishnahs on this page, so don't get confused between the two. This is the second Mishnah on the page. Misha haya eved oy isha oy kotan makrunaise. So we spoke about the mitzvah of waving the lulav and during Hallel, and now we're going to talk about the laws of Hallel. Now, what does it say? So, a person who has shahaya eved or isha kotan, person who had an eved, a slave, a woman, his wife maybe, or a kotan, a child, maybe his son, who's young, who's under bar mitzvah, makrunaisa, reading for him the Hallel. Everyone really is obligated to say the Hallel, but not everyone is a bucky. Not everyone is a bucky, is proficient in reciting it. So Rashi says over here that they had a tradition. Makrunaisa is there was a tradition that minhag was that one person would say Hallel and have everyone in mind. Now, the thing is that there's two different ways of doing this. One way of saying a bracha and doing a mitzvah and having other people in mind is you say the whole thing and everyone else just says amen at the end. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is you say each word with them. You sort of like you read it for them to say after you, repeat after you. That's a different way of being makra, of a different way of allowing people to fulfill their mitzvah. The first way is you're doing the mitzvah, and they're saying amen, and you're having them in mind, and it's as if they said it. The second way is no, you're reading it, and they're repeating after you, and then they're fulfilling the mitzvah through their own recital. Now, so the case over here is that if a person had an eved, an isha, or a katan, if a person had a slave, a woman, or a child reading to them, you can't do the first option. Why not? Because only if someone's obligated to read it could they fulfill the mitzvah for you. They would need to be obligated in order to be mitzi you, and you could just answer in the end, like an amen at the end, or similar, like hallelujah. But here these are not obligated. So what would they do? It says oina acharehem. You have to say the words after them, and they can't be mitzi you. They can't fulfill the obligation for you. That it would be as if you said it, because they themselves are exempt. This only works by people who are obligated. This concept works by people who are obligated to do it. Like, for example, if you have a chazan and shul, and that's what Rashi says over here, that they used to have a custom that one person would say Hallel, and he would have everyone else in mind. Yeah, that's great. That's if he's obligated. People who are obligated to do that, they could, and anyone that's obligated to fulfill the mitzvah themselves, they could fulfill the mitzvah for you. But if someone themselves are not obligated, then they can't fulfill the mitzvah for you, and therefore it's oina acharein. You have to reply after them each word that they say, mashehi naimer, what they're saying. And betavoy loy me'era, and a curse should fall upon someone, upon him, because he doesn't know how to read. He didn't try to learn. Isn't this an embarrassment that they are the ones who are saying it for him? And And the curse, in other words, number one, why didn't he learn? Should have tried to learn himself. And let's say he does know it and he's having them say it. Still, it's like an embarrassment to have someone of a lesser degree be the shliach, be the one in charge, be the one who's saying it. So it's the Mishnah says it's like a curse, not appropriate to do such a thing. It's a curse should come upon such a person. Imhaya gadol makra oisai. If there was an adult who's obligated to say halal, if he was saying the halal, oina acharav halaluka, and everything that the adult recites, all the halal, the person listening should say halaluka. And by doing that, it's almost like saying amen. Halaluka for halal. May Hashem be praised. May Hashem's name be praised. Hallelujah. And so if an adult is doing it, you don't have to say each word, like we said earlier in the Mishnah. No, it's of Hallelujah. You just say Hallelujah. You're saying like Amen. And this is the way it was established. The Nevi'im established it, that this would be more praise and joyous to say Hallelujah. Okay. Now the Mishnah continues and says, Makam Shanago Likpol, place where the custom is. Oh, my time is up here. Let's just finish the sentence. Makam Shanago Likpol Yikpol, a place where the reader is the custom is for the reader is to double those psukim. There are certain psukim that we read and repeat. We repeat the pasuk. So you should follow that minhag. The person who's the chazan should follow. But a place lifshayt where it's only meant to be read once, and so a person who's the chazan there. Yifshayt, you should do like their minhag, or a person who's davening with them should levarech, a person whose minhag is a place where the minhag is to say the bracha after the halal. Yevarech, you should also say hakol. Everything is kaminhag hamadina, like the custom of that place. That's what you should follow. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.